Everyone, in the interest of time, I want to get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sapna Shah. I'm the founder of Retail X Series, and I'm an angel investor. I invest at pre-seed in the future of retail. This is a sort of weekly session we've been having on Thursdays. We have one more coming up next Thursday on early stage D2C acquisition, particularly focused on running Kickstarters and other really early crowdfunding and pre-order type ways to create early stage acquisition for D2C companies. That's with Adrian Solgaard of Solgaard, which is a bag company. So I hope you sign up for that. In the meantime, today, hopefully you're here for the right session. It's called Building Teams, Working with Consultants and Freelancers. We have Claire Humphreys from Wethos on the call. She's going to give us her expert advice. This call is recorded, so if you have to jump off early, this will be up on the RetailX YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will have kind of a moderated discussion for about a half an hour and the rest of the time for Q&A. So with that, Claire, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about Wethos.
Cool. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I know on a Thursday afternoon, there is always a ton going on, so I appreciate it. So I'm Claire. I'm a co-founder and COO of Wethos, a platform made for folks looking to team up and grow their marketing and consulting studios together. Background on myself. So I grew up in Missouri and moved to New York after college. I, of course, like every creative, dreamt about going into the advertising world, which I did for several years. That's where I met my co-founders, Rachel and Kristen. We had the crazy idea to start a company for freelancers, as that's what we, of course, were doing on the side together. So first year, totally self-funded. So quit my day job and worked nights as a bartender in New York City so that I could pitch investors and have client meetings during the day. About a year in, we got our first term sheet from Brooklyn Bridge Ventures. Since then, had several rounds, and we're about 23 people, completely remote. So first started in New York, and I'm actually in New York, but I guess in Montauk now, or for the past year and a half. And we're fully remote with people all over the United States and internationally now.
Great. Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to start by talking about how you make the decision on when to hire someone, even if it's a part-time versus a full-time, or hiring a consulting firm or a freelancer. I think a lot of early stage startups, particularly in the RetailX community, make that, or trying to make those choices based on budget as well as expertise level, and trying to think through those decisions. Is there a decision criteria or framework that you would recommend or that you use when sort of framing this decision?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when I get this question because we have a freelance platform and of course we adore freelancers, and I would love to always say, yes, freelancers is the way to go. I know that's not true, particularly when running our business. So when I think about hiring freelancers, I put them in two categories. You're either hiring someone for expertise. So even for ourselves, we hired a freelancer to redo our brand and the CMS front end of our website, because you could hire those people, but they're going to be $100,000 plus. And why do you need a full-time brand designer at your startup? Probably not. As well as execution. So if you're just looking for a team to manage your social, make sure something is always on, or handle the paid media that you always have on, that's a great way to do it. That's how we do all of our marketing through our own teams, which is great. Or admin work. So we have a data librarian that is constantly cleaning up the data in our product, or executive assistants that are part-time, super clear roles, but we don't need to necessarily have them in all of the internal meetings with our staff. Full-time, this is a bit of a hot topic up for debate of when clients come in and they want us to put together a tech team to build their core product for their startup. I always turn them away. I'm just a big believer, if you have a startup that has a core tech IP associated with it, you need to have those people full-time and in-house. They need to have equity in your startup as well. If not, if you're hiring a firm to do that stuff, they might not have the same incentives aligned with your own to make sure that this is scalable and really a great fit for your users. So I'm a big fan of CMS front-end websites outsourced to a team. Any tech that you're building in the back end, get developers on. It's worth it, I promise. As well as strategic work. So at Wethos, we have directors at the helm of every department. So sales director, marketing director, product director. Underneath them, of course, freelancers are a great fit, but making sure that you have someone strategically leading a department and the goals and objectives that's in-house, again, with equity, really incentivized to stay at your company long-term is incredibly important. So that's how we divvy it up whenever we're deciding between hiring freelance, whether a firm or an individual, or full-time.
It's interesting that you say that, kind of those strategic elements that you need to keep in-house. And I 100% agree with you. I think when you're at the really early stage, though, you can't even afford those people, right? Like the person, and it comes up a lot with on the D2C side with marketing in general, right? So yes, you might outsource some branding work or whatever, but you've got to do day-to-day marketing, whether that's email, CRM, social, all of those things. Is there an argument to be made that if you had maybe like a really great advisor or somebody who has maybe a little bit of equity in the company who's willing to be that strategic person for a certain number of hours a month, then you could still at the early stage staff those things with freelancers?
Absolutely. At our earliest stage, so my co-founders and I are marketers, we're creatives, we're designers, we're strategists. It's what we do. So we felt comfortable being at the helm of the sales team, CX team, marketing team, of course, but we felt very uncomfortable with products. So the first advisor that we brought on was a tech advisor, and he's still with us today on our board of directors. He's really, really wonderful. And we had him vet any code that was coming through, making sure that everything was safe and secure, because if that is the most valuable part of your startup, the tech IP, you just want to make sure that someone that you trust is overseeing it rather than trusting an outsourced third party potential like small tech agency.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so once you've decided, okay, I could use a consultant or a freelancer on this particular project that is not strategic to my business, but important. So what are the best ways to structure an engagement? I know a lot of early stage founders think about maybe doing a trial period or a small project before moving forward with something longer term or bigger. I think this is a place where a lot of founders I talk to make a lot of mistakes and waste a lot of money on people who maybe aren't the right fit or weren't the right skill set. It's particularly hard, I think, when as the founder, you don't have that particular skill set. So sort of how do you recommend kind of doing that vetting process and then structuring it?
That's absolutely something that we do. I would never tell anyone to go into an annual contract with someone they haven't worked with before, because it's just so risky, not only for you, but for the specialists themselves. So recommend a 3-month contract. 1 month's not enough. It takes about a month to get anyone new up to speed with your business. So your expectations will always be a bit inflated if you have a month of a trial period, or just project-based. We're a big fan of project-based work. See how they work, then start to extend their contracts from there. And a lot of freelancers that we know prefer that as well. They're like, I don't want to get into a relationship with a company that is not a good fit for me, where I have to get out of it, even though I've signed a contract to stay into this. So totally agree that should be something that you keep very short term and then grow from there. Then the other thing to keep in mind that I think we didn't have expectations set for, but now we try to make sure that this is very clear in the upfront, is no matter what you do with a scope or a contract, what you assume up front, particularly at an ever-changing startup, will likely change. So keep the contract flexible and make sure that you have in the contracts very clear, hey, if things change, this is what happens. Don't do any work. We need to stop, have a conversation, agree about whatever additional costs or things that might need to be taken out, and what the hourly rate or flat rate would be for that to happen. So it's all negotiated up front. I kind of like a prenup with your freelancer. It's a very clear upfront, so you don't need to have this negotiations down the road, which are arguably inevitable.
And I want to kind of go back a little bit to the sort of the vetting part. Do you think that founders, when they're looking at freelancer options, should you be interviewing them the same way you would have interviewed a full-time hire, like just in terms of process and making sure if you've got multiple co-founders that they've all met with them, or all of those things?
I think it kind of depends on how big the contract is. Like if you're bringing in someone for expertise, I would put them through the same process, have them talk to all the co-founders, ask them the right questions, make sure that you're asking for their references as well. If it's someone for execution, I think that's a tough thing to say, because you might be wasting their time when it's a small contract to be like, let me talk to your references and I want you to have 3 or 4 hours of interviews, which could be seen as a bit unethical of taking someone's free time when it's for such a small contract. So, but I totally think it's important for like the expertise type of roles.
Great, thank you. And then once you have the confidence that this is the right person for the job, you alluded to the fact that if things keep your contract flexible, so that if things change, you can fundamentally say like, let's stop and look at this. But are there best practices in terms of setting up that relationship? Like just in terms of, you've talked about that sort of flexibility, but whether there's kind of renewals or things like that you've used that have worked really well for you.
Yeah, so I'll say, I think I will say this in every single talk I could ever give, but always have a contract. So we actually have the executive director of the Freelancers Union as an advisor for us, who spearheaded the New York Freelance Isn't Free Act that basically mandates a contract, which is such a simple thing that I don't know why so many people go into business with freelancers without a contract, but it's super, super important. So please keep that in mind. One piece of advice I'll give about contracts is, I guess if I could go back in time, I don't know if I would go be a full stack developer or a lawyer, but probably a lawyer, because they're really, really important to your business. So make sure you spend at least a little bit of upfront money, get an individual lawyer. You don't need a firm. Firms hike up costs pretty substantially, but they aren't great for larger startups. So have a lawyer write your first legal contract, and then give and take on different items for full-time versus contract. Again, I don't think it would be fair to ask a contractor to have a non-compete, but they should have a confidentiality agreement. And one thing you should be really careful about, which is always top of mind for us, is if you have a contractor, make sure that it can't be confused by the IRS or anyone from an audit that they should be a full-time employee. So there's 3 rules of thumb to keep in mind whenever you're hiring a contractor. One, very simply, they need to be working on their own computer. We've made this mistake before of, hey, we need to buy this contractor a computer. It's a really, really bad sign to anyone looking at your company if they're working on your own equipment, because then you have control over everything they do on that computer. Secondarily, they should be able to work on their own terms. So you can't expect a contractor to be online from 9 to 5, because then they're a W-2 employee and not a 1099 contractor. And then thirdly, they should have the ability to work with other clients. So if they're working 40 plus hours with you, they probably should be a W-2 employee, or else you're running a really fine line with anyone who is looking to get more potential taxes out of you, or look at the confusion between a freelancer and a W-2 employee, which is a very sensitive topic. So, and make sure that your contracts have it super clear that they are an independent contractor, they have these rights, and there's no confusion about whether or not you have control over their time or their work.
And one of the things, and maybe this is not one of those 3 rules, but one of the things I also heard on this, and tell me if you, what your perspective is that they need to be invoicing you for their time or whatever you've agreed on in the contract, because those invoices are a proof that they spent a certain number of hours that's not 40 hours or whatever that is a week.
Yep, paper trail is super, super important. Make sure everything is like very clear from, the scope itself of, you are not a full-time employee with us. These are our expectations of you, to the invoices, to like any email communications where, hey, people hire contractors to be full-time all the time. That's okay, but they should have a new contract then, and then it should change to be super clear of, you're a full-time employee, you get these types of benefits, and these are our expectations.
Yeah, that's really helpful advice. And a little funny story. in my startup, we got nailed on this because we did not do those things correctly. We got audited by the state and had to pay a fine. And that was not enjoyable at all. And we had to pay for an audit. It was a lot.
Yeah, it's always like the less sexy operational things that you're like, I'm so happy that I went through the effort to get the right contracts, because that really could have come back to bite me during, inevitably whatever happens a year from now.
Yeah. I mean, if we talk about nothing else, I feel like this was a very important point to make. So thank you for sharing that and bringing back my memories of doing this incorrectly. We've talked about the contract a lot. Is there a standard contract that you can start with that you could find online, or is this really something that you need to work out with an attorney individually based on your company?
I mean, yes, my formal advice is always go to a lawyer for advisement so that you're not stepping on your fiduciary responsibilities with a contract that is harmful to the company. But I mean, I've definitely gone on to LegalZoom as a very early stage startup and looked at different contracts and tried to figure out if that contract language would make sense for us. But I also had the benefit of randomly writing the legal language in advertising back in the day, which probably wasn't a great thing for the firms to allow, but it's a tricky situation. Sometimes when you're reading legal contracts, it feels like you're reading a different language. You're like, I don't know what I'm agreeing to. So having someone walk you through that is always super important so that you're clear too. And yeah, you don't get screwed down the road.
Great, thank you. Okay, so how about going back to managing the relationship with your consultants or freelancer? How do you, and maybe you put this in the contract, maybe it's something else, but how do you manage that on an ongoing basis, like metrics or goals or check-ins, or particularly for those kind of project-based things where maybe it's a 6-month project and you maybe don't want to wait till month 5, day 30 to figure out that it's not exactly what everybody wanted?
Totally. So if you have someone on retainer, we'll bring them into our process that we use internally, OKRs, objectives and key results. I'm sure many of you have heard about before, where you have quarterly goals and then you check in on them weekly. And then you have retrospectives every week to see how you're tracking against it and where your priority should be for the coming week. And if it's project-based, the same. In the contract or in the brief, you should have clear key performance indicators or goals where you're saying, this is exactly what I want to see by the end of this. If it's a senior person, let them decide the roadmap. If it's a junior person just doing the execution, make the roadmap for them. They're probably not going to be able to do it themselves, and it's going to cost you a lot of money to go back and forth on the details of why the goals aren't being hit. I'm a big fan of weekly check-ins, one-on-ones, whether over the phone, I guess over Zoom, the world we're living in, or in person if we ever meet in person again. And just making sure that it's really, really clear at the upfront, because I think we work with a lot of startups and founders who are like, hey, I'm not exactly sure what I'm looking for, but I know I want someone to do this. I'm like, well, what do you want to see from the website to know that it's successful? Because success is subjective if you don't put quantitative goals against it. And it's super important to make sure it's really clear about this is a conversion rate I want to see on my website, or the traffic I want to see that lands there, or the types of users that I want to make sure are interacting with our brand at the very start. And of course, again, keep it flexible. Things could change based on learnings. It's a startup. We kind of live every day you wake up and something new arises, which is why we all become founders. So we love chaos, which is great.
We love chaos. Maybe that should be the title of this session.
I love it.
Okay, so you've gone through this process, you've hired a freelancer or two, you have a project, you've set up a contract, check-ins. Sometimes it just doesn't work out, right? And the length of contract aside, you just see that it's not panning out, it's not working, the goals aren't being met, or it's just not the right person or the right skill set, or to your point, something in the business changes and you don't need that person anymore. So how should founders handle that? I think that this is always a hard thing of knowing kind of when to pull the plug, how to pull the plug. Obviously, there might be some contractual something in the contract that you have to work around, but talk to me a little bit about, what you've done in those situations.
Yeah, and I think there's a saying that the hardest thing a founder has to do is fire someone or let someone go. I believe it's the same whenever you're working with freelancers, and of course, we've dealt with this letting go employees or freelancers many times in our past. And I'm a big believer. Maybe I'm too empathetic, but like I'm a big believer that honesty and transparency are key. Like, yes, they work for you, you pay them, but to not treat them like a human being is just doing them a disservice. And to me, with firing someone without giving them constructive feedback or talking with them about some of the issues that you're having, but having it be a surprise is a bit unethical in my mind. So making sure that you've done the actual due diligence to have that conversation with them, give them that feedback, make sure that there really is a misalignment, or yes, there's just a change in your company and you are really honest with them about what's happening. I think that's the way to go with it. One thing I think about with internal employees is if someone's not working out and you're not happy with them and you've had several rounds of feedback, they're likely also not happy in their role. You can't imagine that there's such a disconnect that after several conversations that they're like, I love this is great. This is a great fit. They might be thinking the same thing. So just make sure it's really clear. And when you end the relationship, they know the next steps of who to hand this off to, or if it's a bit of a tumultuous relationship, make sure that you have someone on the phone or in the background, removing them from all things to keep the company safe and secure, because people are people and they're unpredictable. And at the end of the day, you really need to look out for the company as well as make sure that you're treating other people well.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I think I think we've seen a lot of that right now with even full-time, part-time employees, all the furloughs that have happened because of COVID, and all the changes in everyone's businesses. So I've seen a lot of founders be very transparent and actually very sad to let people go, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So speaking of that, so we're still in this place where maybe we're in some phase one reopening in certain parts of New York State, and certain in the city we're still not. So we're still at a point where we're working from home, we're working remotely. I know this is literally everything that you have always done. So, how do you manage, honestly, both freelancers and employees remotely? What are the techniques that have worked best for you at Wethos? Because I think this is something that's probably new for a lot of the founders on this call.
Yeah, so we are big fans of asynchronous communication. So, one thing we have a firm stance on is that there should not be any Zoom meetings where it's a presentation, where it's just someone's talking and sharing their screen. We use a tool called Loom. I love Loom. I swear I should be sponsoring them, but I don't. It's just a really great tool for asynchronous communication where you can present, share your screen, share it out to the team. And then we have meetings after that called DDD meetings, discuss, debate, decide. And everyone has to come to that meeting, already have heard the presentation, read through the materials, and coming with thoughts where you're going to debate the insights, figure out next steps, or talk about the implications. So meetings should just be used to be collaborative, not presentation. So if you can asynchronously connect on anything, do that first. Another standard, I think that has been a game changer for our company, is having very strict weekly structures. So we have all hands on Monday and Friday run by my co-founder and myself. That is, no one can miss them unless you're out of office that day. Do not schedule meetings over it. This is the one time that the team will be able to connect weekly. And between that, have stand-ups, but if you want to, but take advantage of being a remote company. I think the best part about being remote is that you're empowering your employees with flexibility. If people work better on Saturday mornings rather than Friday afternoons, that's okay. As long as it's super clear and the goals they need to hit weekly and they're showing progress, they don't need to, be online during a certain time or be sitting in meetings all day. Take advantage of them being at home and the crazy circumstances that are going on, whether they have kids or they have a partner, or they have parents they're taking care of. I mean, there's a ton of different crazy things going on now. And I think the more flexibility that you can give employees, the more empowered they'll be. And to me, I think that's where you see the best results, when you put the power back in their hands to take advantage of the goals on their terms and their time.
Do you find that works for all levels? Like, if you're onboarding someone new right now, right, where maybe you haven't really even met them in person yet, and maybe they're pretty junior, is it the same level of kind of empowerment and being on your own goals? Like that feels like sort of the perfect storm of, more junior, also very new to the company, where it might be a little more difficult to do that.
100%. Onboarding is a whole different story. If you're bringing on someone new, it's going to be such a time suck for the first few weeks because they need to get that context. And what we do is if someone new starts, we invite them to every meeting that we have on the calendar, whether or not it's in their department or not. So they can just absorb and listen in as if we were in an office and they were overhearing conversations for the first 2 weeks, because we know that you're just a sponge. There's nothing that, you can necessarily act on yet. But I think with more junior employees, that's why stand-ups help. Hey, what did you get done yesterday? What are your priorities today? What are you blocked on? And making sure that you're really available for those more junior employees and that the goals are clear. Like if they have a goal, but not a roadmap to get there, that's going to be very hard and confusing when they're sitting by themselves in their living room trying to figure out how to get here. And they're like, should I ping my boss? I can't just walk over and tap them on the shoulder to have them review something. Be aware that these more junior employees are probably not going to feel super comfortable saying, hey, I don't know what's going on. So take that step forward and be like, let me check in to see how everything's going. Is there anything I can clarify? Like, here's the roadmap, or here's how I was thinking of how you could tackle it. What do you think? And I think it'll give a big sense of relief of, okay, someone is here. They are looking out for me, even if I feel like I'm staring at a computer screen and that I'm working on my own on a problem I don't know how to solve.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think that that's probably some really tactical advice that's incredibly helpful at this particular moment. I want to end with one last question before we go to the audience Q&A, which is, if there was like one piece of critical advice that you would give founders on this call for managing freelancers or consultants, what would that piece of advice be?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this question in particular because I think there's a ton of different ways that you could slice this, but I guess I'm a person that likes to self-reflect all the time, maybe to my detriment a bit, but I'd really encourage everyone to be super self-reflective whenever they're working with freelancers, another firm, or like a new employee. A lot of the success is on you, not only from a hiring perspective, but an onboarding and briefing perspective. So we see all the time startups bringing on freelancers and being, thinking that they should get inside their head and know exactly what they're thinking without the proper materials or onboarding or briefing. Oh, it's fine. Just show me what you got. Oh, that was really different from what I was expecting. Well, how are we supposed to know what you're expecting when nothing's in writing? There is no brief. We haven't had any brainstorming conversations yet. And it can be really quick to judge on someone that you bring on. And most of the time it can be solved by just putting in a few extra hours up front to get everything they need and make sure that they're supported, because at the end of the day, you're going to waste a lot of time at the back end trying to find someone new, trying to fix any issues or miscommunications that weren't aligned on up front. And yeah, not everyone works out, and that's okay. But I think a proper briefing, which is probably just the advertising in me, we love briefs, but a proper briefing solves many problems.
Great, thank you. All right, so I want to turn to the audience questions. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. I'm literally just going to go in order and read them out. From Armin, the first question is, what's your opinion of platforms like Upwork, TopTail, etc.?
It's interesting. I think those platforms, something like Upwork, was pretty revolutionary whenever it first came out, right? Like no one was freelancing. Being a 1099 contractor wasn't even a blip on the radar. And I think Upwork really normalized that. When you think about Upwork in particular, we are almost like the opposite of Upwork. We also have the founder of Upwork invested into us. So full transparency there. And the conversations that we have with him are really, really inspiring because Upwork scales. There's so many jobs there. There's so many specialists there, and that's great. But it's almost like an overflow of information and there's so many choices, and it's really difficult to know how to vet someone, or is this person actually a good fit? I can't really see their profile. I think there's a miscommunication on how we're discussing what the scope is, because none of those features are in there, from scoping to onboarding to vetting. So great for some purposes. We've arguably used it to find executive assistants before, because that's not something that we have on our platform. And then TopTal is really interesting. They are very, very good at vetting. I think they have like a 3% acceptance rate. And they are great at what they do, making sure that every developer that you work with is really high quality. Of course, there's a price that comes with that, right? They're going to take a fee on every hour that the developer works with you. So at least you're getting that security of knowing that that person's gone through a really vigorous vetting process, but it's still not necessarily someone that's full-time in-house. And they do have a pretty crazy fee if you do want to take that person off of TopTal and have them in-house with you. So I think there's pros and cons to both, and there's reasons that you might use both. But we feel like a very different platform, since we work with like the creative directors from agencies that are now building their own agencies in order to empower them to build up their teams around them and run their business as efficiently as possible.
Great, thank you. All right, question from Taylor. If I'm currently based in California, but I'm registered in Delaware, but have a wholesale license in New York State, where do I seek legal counsel if I'm direct consumer? I'm assuming you mean legal counsel on the people you're hiring. I guess would also, my guess is, where you hiring the people.
Yeah, so legal counsel is interesting. Like our general counsel, he is barred in New York and California, but of course we have employees all over. So he is very transparent with us, where he's like, hey, when it comes to employment law, I'm not an expert between all of the various states, but I can help with all of the terms and conditions, your website, get really strategic with you all on how the user agreement should be formatted, or basically all the legal that goes around having a board of directors and scaling up your company. But from employment, I would specifically look for a lawyer who's barred in the place that you hire most of your employees. For us, it has to be a firm, because they have to have a specialty in internationally and all of the different states. But if you're just in New York, find a New York barred lawyer. They're going to be great, and you're not going to have to deal with the difficulties of hiring between states, which is surprisingly a lot of work. And that was something I didn't expect at first. How we found legal counsel, there are a few different platforms where you can find lawyers, like I'm forgetting the name of one that's off the tip of my tongue. I can follow up with it. Hire and Esquire. But for us, we happen to just ask our advisors and our investors to give us recommendations. I'm a big believer in recommendations and network effects when it comes to finding the right people. And that's how we ended up finding our GC, just because the platforms can make it really difficult to be able to vet lawyers when you're not a lawyer.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Monica got a question. Will we be sending out the recording? The answer is yes. Okay, just to confirm, I think there was a question, loom.com, that's the asynchronous tool you mentioned.
So easy to use. We really love Loom. It's something that we talk about far too much, but I hope that you all like it as well.
I feel like you might be getting like some affiliate marketing fee from Loom.
That and 15.5 I talk about a lot too. And I'm like, oh man, I really should snatch a deal. No, I'm kidding. They're good tools. They're good, and they're good startups in there. I think Loom just raised a big round of funding, totally deserved, because it's the future of work. I really believe that.
Great, thank you. Next question from Catherine. What are the key features you should include in a brief? Also, what questions should be asked when you vet a consultant for your project?
So our briefs, I can follow up with a template as well, but our briefs always have the problem. If you're not educating them on the problem you're trying to solve, it's very confusing, again, for them to get inside your head. If there's any like assumptions or hypotheses of what you're assuming, and then the desired outcome, goals, key performance indicators, making sure that's in there. That is really the upfront of like how you set up the strategy. Other things in briefs always include if you have timeline expectations or target audience is really, really important, as well as like deliverables. If you're expecting a specific deliverable at the end of this, make it super clear in there, because if you want to leave it open-ended, be comfortable with whatever they suggest. But the most important part of a brief to me is the problem and your assumptions.
And then what about the second part of that question, which was what questions should be asked when you vet a consultant for your project?
So I'll typically ask questions to see, one, if they're a good culture fit for the company. So how do they work, and how do they typically run through solving problems? So leave it super open-ended. And I love leaving difficult questions, I guess, so that people, if they're feeling like this has been something that you could have found online and it's not a specific story with a specific example, that's where I start to get a little bit cautious. Ask them to talk about their experience. Ask them to talk about a specific example when they work with a client when it wasn't a good fit, or whenever they solve the toughest problem that they solved this past year. And see if the answers are impressive enough for you to want to continue working with them. Other questions is, of course, want to see your portfolio or past work that you've done. That's a really big one. And one question that I think is an awkward question that people don't often ask in upfront questions, like it's also with investor meetings as well, is like ask a tough question upfront of what's your rate? How much are you willing to pay? And be really transparent with them about that, because it's really confusing in the freelance world when they're putting together scopes and cost, because if your rate is much smaller than they would be expecting, they'll come back with a proposal that is at that level and be honest with you of, hey, because this is so low, I can't do XYZ, or vice versa. If it's bigger or there is no limit, then let them come with the biggest proposal possible and you can cut stuff down from there if you need to. But always, always, always ask about rate, flat rates, and have that transparent conversation so you're not wasting your time either if it's someone that's out of your price range.
Great, thank you. Very helpful. Question from Rebecca. Can you please differentiate hiring for expertise versus execution again?
Yep. So when I think about expertise, my mind always goes directly to creative director types. So someone that you're going with a problem and a target audience with, plus a goal, but you're having them decide how they're going to get there and how this looks. So for example, if you're running a Christmas campaign and you want it to look a little bit different or really stand out, have them come back with 3 or 4 concepts of what this could look like. Don't advise them on that, because this is their expertise. They are creative directors. Same with branding. Give them as much information as possible, but let them come back with their expertise on recommendations of how this should look, which is, a more senior role. They'll have, several years of experience plus, and it's something that they are able to show off on their portfolio time and time again, where it's a style that you like and you're giving them direction, but really letting them take the reins. Because let's face it, if we all tried to create our own logos, the word clip arts would be overused many, many times. Logos are really important. So is branding. So is color palette. So are fonts that you use. And having someone with an expertise and an eye towards that is really, really important. Execution, I see that as like something that's ongoing, like maintenance for social media, making sure that you have someone that is posting on social. Maybe they're even coming up with the social content itself, from the visuals to the copy, but they don't always have to be. Maybe they're just managing it and making sure they're always staying on. And admin work like data librarian or executive assistant, where it's super clear on what they need to do week over week, and there's not a lot of oversight that needs to happen, but it's also not necessarily something that requires a lot of expertise.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Hopefully that helped differentiate it. The next question is from Florence. Great discussion, thank you. What are your thoughts on how to set up payment structures for freelancers, hourly versus project-based?
Oh, wow. I mean, this is an interesting one, because this is something that we've wrapped our head around for a long time. at Wethos, we actually created a points-based system to try to solve a lot of the operational inefficiencies that come with working with a ton of freelancers, dealing with payments and contracts that go throughout. It's not for everyone. But what we've heard from most of our freelancers is that they feel most comfortable with having a floor. So they know that the contract is going to be at least $5K, and then an hourly rate on top of that, where they just let their team know, hey, I'm going to be going over X amount of hours this week or this month. I think, and maybe I'm going back to the empathy thing too much again, but when you think about putting yourself in the shoes of a freelancer, if they're working on hourly, like they have rent they need to pay, they have specific like amount of money that they need to bring in every single month. And if you're leaving it really vague with them, one, you're not really sure about what you're going to need to pay out at the end of the month. And two, the freelancer isn't really sure how much time they should spend with you or pitching new clients. So I'm a big fan of like at least having either a floor or project base where it's super, super clear what the deliverables are, plus an hourly rate for flexibility on top of that, so that expectations are set on both sides. Because you also don't want to get hit with a 10K bill when you were expecting it to be 2K because there was, as many hours in the world that you want to go. It's, hey, once you hit this amount of hours, can you just let us know and let's have a conversation about it.
Great, thank you. From Armin, do you have an opinion on 99 Designs?
Well, I don't know 99 Designs that well. Personal opinion, purely my own opinion. I don't love that there's a lot of free work that's done on 99 Designs that people don't get paid out for. I'm a big believer that freelance isn't free, and if you're going to ask them to do work, they should get paid. And I think there is a lot of really, really amazing design work done on 99 Designs that they never get paid out for, and that's a really tough life. And I don't think I would use it because of that reason.
Got it. Okay. Next question. I'm so sorry. I'm going to say the name wrong. From Anikimi. I'm curious about what you see as the future for Wethos as you scale, especially versus how you described Upwork.
Yeah. So Wethos, it's interesting because where I really see our bread and butter is it comes with teaming. In the past, when you're thinking about the gig economy or freelancers, you're thinking about an individual doing work, right? You very rarely think about it as like teams coming together, but that is something that is happening naturally across the board. So when I worked in advertising, basically all of my creative directors I used to work with are now independent consultants with their own shops. Yes, they have not started the next Ogilvy and Mathers. Like that's impossible, right? That's been decades and decades of work to make that happen. But they're usually working flexibly, they're traveling, they can work remotely, they get to pick their own clients, they get to pick the work that they want to do because they are that senior and they're working with other freelancers to make that happen. Because an individual working on something is only so powerful. Having a team is where you could do your best work. Same with a startup. I think there's always a recommendation of get a co-founder. That balances you out because it'll just make the work that much better. So for us, we really concentrate on teaming and empowering those individuals that are creating their own kind of micro agencies or agencies themselves to be able to scale up, because there's so much friction right now for these individuals. There's a bunch of different tools that aren't connected to one another. There's so much confusion to be able to find teammates to work with because that freelancer that you always bring in as your designer is on vacation for 2 weeks. Okay, how am I going to bring in someone here? Constantly pitching clients, dealing with contracts, invoices, payments. It's a lot of the same problems that startups deal with at early stages. But freelancers don't have even the possibility of venture capital backing for their agencies to make their dreams kind of come to fruition. And so that's what at least we're focused on from a Wethos standpoint, is building out the technology that enables these freelancers to get more bandwidth back in their day by taking a lot of the pain that comes with scoping business operations, finding teammates, and also putting a network around that, because they should be able to collaborate and find one another as well as learn from one another, which is really, really important. Freelance can be really lonely and isolated. And if you're not going to some networking event to find other freelancers, it's really difficult to find them. So we want to make that place so that this becomes a really, really possible career choice for a ton of creatives around the world, rather than one that just a few get to have the luxury of having.
Great, thank you. From Jessica. So when we've worked with creative freelancers, they come back with work that misses key fundamentals of graphic or visual design. This is really frustrating because then we get into a tailspin on revision rounds. However, as the expert, shouldn't they be automatically elevating things with basics like symmetry, affordances, golden rules, etc.? Can you please give me some advice on how to avoid or manage through this?
Yeah, so this could be a twofold problem. One, hiring wise, they might not be the best fit. So oftentimes when you're looking at a portfolio, you really want to dig into, okay, the work on your portfolio, were you a part of a team that did this, or did you actually design this? Sometimes you're looking at someone's really beautiful website that's on your portfolio and assume that, and you know, I think maybe they're hoping that they were working under that UX UI designer and they're hoping they could get to that level, but it's not really necessarily just theirs alone. So making sure you're really digging into whatever caught your eye about their portfolio to hire them, to make sure that they're really capable of that. And they could show several examples of how they've done that independently. Another thing that I stand for when hiring any creative visual design specialist is creating a mood board for them that I'll create based on what I'm thinking. So when you're giving someone full creative flexibility to come back with what they want, oftentimes it does miss the mark because there's no way to have that alignment. So I'm a big fan of mood boards, whether you want to go on to, I don't know, any of your favorite websites to pull websites that really inspired you or designs that you think are the same quality that you're looking for. That can really set those expectations. And of course, if they hit that mark after that first round, or I maybe give it one more round after that, it might not be the best fit. And at least, well, maybe the glass is half full way to look at it is you've learned something about vetting freelancers and you'll probably have a better chance of finding the next person the next time around.
Yeah, this is an interesting question because we had an in-person session on how to build a brand last year, back when we used to have in-person sessions. And, and one of the participants was Rachel Cohen from Snow. And I remember her specifically saying that when they went to hire a branding firm, they did like so much homework on their own, mood boards, swipes, looking at lots of other brands. And they use that to do the vetting of the branding firms that they talk to, because the ones that didn't feel like they had a particular point of view or an aligned point of view weren't going to be a good fit. And so it feels like a little analogous to that such kind of situation.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess the other way is like if you have all the money in the world, you are Coca-Cola, you can hire a huge ad agency that's going to put tons and tons of design resources to come up with all the mood boards, let you choose from the mood boards, come up with all of these options, let you choose from them. It's just going to be pricey. And by doing that upfront work yourself, particularly as a founder, I don't know, I guess in my opinion, it's so hard to outsource certain parts of your company that I know I just need to sit down on that Friday afternoon and like crank out exactly what I'm thinking or exactly what my vision is there, or a deck around it that's describing my thoughts. That really sets the stage for finding the right partner. It's almost like doing a little pre-homework before you even go out and bet, which is strangely important, but something that we love to do because it's a creative exercise.
Yeah, for sure. If anybody else has any other questions, please put them in the chat. Meanwhile, I will ask one other question because you alluded, or you kind of briefly said the name of another tool when you mentioned Loom. It was something 15 something.
Oh, yeah. Oh gosh, I'm like 15.5 spokesperson. So yeah, so 15.5. Well, maybe it's just because I am our COO, like very much about like making sure that we're hiring the right people. Also, like there's performance management and engagement. So 15.5 is a really great tool. You can use it to track your OKRs, set your quarterly goals. And every week, every employee submits like a retrospective on their week. What did they accomplish and what are they prepping for the next week? So it's like an async connect with the employee, their manager. I review all of my team's 15.5s every single week just to get a pulse on how the company's doing. And to me, it's a big game changer to get into your employees' minds, but also make sure that you have a pulse check on like their happiness or like how clear they are on what they have going on. And again, asynchronous connections, you can review it on a Sunday night or on a Wednesday morning. You have the choice to be able to choose whenever you're spending time to view it, which is a luxury that I love.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I have a question from Liz. You've mentioned a stand-up meeting. Can you talk about those? Who has them and what is the agenda like?
Yeah, so stand-up meetings are something that we've tried as a startup. Maybe when we were 10 people, we had the whole company on every day at 10 a.m. for 15 minutes. Everyone talked about what they did yesterday, what they're doing today, and what they're blocked on. I would not recommend that. We reverted away from that. And now we just do it by department. So department lead with what we call packs. So packs on different initiatives where it's a pack of 4, a lead and 3 executors underneath, have the option to have stand-ups. Really important for product teams, very important for sales teams, arguably important for other types of teams. But basically it starts, every single person has 5 minutes or 3 minutes. What did you do yesterday? Only 3 things. What are you doing today? Only 3 things. Is there anything you're blocked on? And if it turns into a discussion, stay on afterward, like help the person get unblocked with whoever's there, and move 15 minutes. Do not let it last any longer than that, or else you're just going to get sucked into another meeting. So keep it super, super crisp and tight.
Great. From AH, is it 15.55 or 15.5? Maybe we need a website.
Okay, so 15.5, which is a kind of a jargony word.
I see it. Armin found it. It's www.15, then the word 5.com. All right, we got it.
Perfect.
Okay. Any other questions from the group? We have time for probably one more before we have to wrap up. And meanwhile, while I wait for one last question, I will just kind of let everybody know again, this was recorded, so the recording will be up on the Retail X Series YouTube, and you can also find a link to it from the Retail X Series website. Anybody who was on this call today will be invited to join our Google group and Slack group if you haven't already, and you'll be put on the email list for future sessions. Like I said, there's a session next week on customer acquisition, particularly focused on Kickstarters. Then we're going to take a 3-week break because my son is graduating from high school and we're doing some fun things around that. And I just don't have time to run another session during that time. And then we'll go back to having sessions every other week through the end of July, taking the month of August off. Maybe by then we'll meet people in person and start back up in September. I don't see any other questions, but Claire, this was incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for your time. I think we all appreciate it, and I'm getting a lot of appreciating it on the chat as well. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Have a great Thursday.
All right, everyone. Goodbye.